Hi everybody. Okay, I will make a start. Welcome to this Construction Excellence event, where we've got a number of speakers with us today to look at some of the zero carbon solutions that we have in Yorkshire and some of the research that we're doing that's probably more broadly further afield, but that hopefully will capture your interests. So this was really started by some research that we did some years ago over at Haigh Hall Farm, the solar farm, and we started to evaluate the performance of the solar array over the farm, and just realised quite how much was going on our own doorstep in terms of the potential to take facilities off grid, and really to start to look how practically we're decarbonising the building stock, and more broadly, we've got presenters here who are going to talk to us about photovoltaics and solar and energy hubs, as well as how we're linking in our energy efficiency strategy with local communities, and then what's likely to happen to us as we start to pump hydrogen in our networks, and we see how we're likely to respond to that. So the speakers we've got with us today are Stephen Butterfield from Haigh Hall Farm, John Brooks, Ian Caveen, who are also going to talk to us about the developments at Haigh Hall Farm, Robin Dummett and Locust Root from Innova, James Taylor from Coca-Cola, Andy Boyle from Otley Energy, and Fiona Fylan from Leeds Sustainability Institute. So just briefly, I met with Stephen Butterfield quite some years ago now, for looking at the development at Haigh Hall Farm and looking at what they were doing with their first real array, and the potential to take small communities off grid and involve local community. And we thought that it would be a good idea to share some of those experiences and really how they're working with Coca-Cola. What is interesting is how, when you actually develop these projects, how some of the ecology can restore itself, and we can actually start to really tackle some of the broader sustainability challenges when you're actually taking areas off grid. So I really just wanted to open up on what is technically possible and what might be achieved when we start to take areas off grid. Stephen, is there anything else that you wanted to briefly add before we move on to what we're doing with John?
Yeah, no problem. What it is really is looking at the sustainability and working with the community and how we can improve what we're doing in the local area. And because we live and work in this area, it's integrating where we are with the working with local businesses, i.e. Coca-Cola's European partners, working with the local community, the chapel, and looking how we can serve those people, and basically just working with the developers, how we can actually help improve systems. Now, John and Robin and Ian will explain all that much better than me, but I can explain on the ecology side.
Thanks, Stephen. So we've got in Yorkshire, this is an example from one of our largest photovoltaic arrays in the area. And if I can pass over to you, John, are you with us to really talk through some of the development that's been happening at Haigh Hall Farm and how you've been involved? John, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, if we can just move on to my slides. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, I'll just get your slides for you now, John. Just 1 second.
Yeah, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm John Brooks. I am a director with a company called WSP. We're a global property and engineering advisory company, and I've been working alongside Stephen for the past 10 years, providing advice, planning advice on the Haigh Hall Solar Farm array. So next slide. So what I'm going to do in my 10 minutes is just provide some basic information about the solar farm, look at the planning history of the solar farm, inform you as to where the electricity goes, set out the current planning position, and then just provide some further information about the off-grid integrated solution that we're currently looking at. So next slide. So that's where the solar farm is. It's to the south of West Ardsley. It's on the very southern edge of the district of Leeds, at the point where Leeds and Kirklees join one another. And you'll see from the right-hand side of the screen, it's actually only a few fields away from the M1 motorway. The M1 actually travels more north-south, just to the south of the screen. And I think it's seen by hundreds of thousands of people every day. How many people recognise it as a solar farm is another matter. My opinion is it has a fairly neutral landscape impact. But it's particularly important to acknowledge that it is in the West Yorkshire green belt. It's also in an area of high landscape value, and these were two of the key issues that we had to overcome when we secured planning permission for the site back in 2013. And I'll come back in particular to the green belt issue later. Next slide. So this is a drawing from the planning permission pack. It shows how this solar farm was to be developed out. The fields, which are there's three parts to it. The right-hand part is the eastern field, the middle part, the central field. Those are the sort of the bluey green shadings, and then the western field, which is the blue lines on the yellow background. That's the western field. And in conjunction, those parts of the solar farm were developed out back in 2016-17 for the eastern and central fields, and then in 2021 for the western field. And if we move on to the next slide, please, you'll see the first two of the fields that were developed out. And once those fields were developed, that was actually 32,000 solar panels shown on in those two fields. And then the introductory slide that was shown at the start when Chris was speaking, that showed the field that was developed to the west, which was only developed last year. The building in the middle of the solar array is an inverter station, and that's all linked to the transfer of direct current to AC current. And there's the only other parts to bring your attention to with regard to the solar panels or solar array itself is there's a 3-meter fence goes around the whole site for security. So if we can go on to the next site, or to the next slide, please. I'm keen to show you the relationship between the solar farm itself, which is on the left-hand side of the screen in the blue circle, and the Coca-Cola bottling plant on the right-hand side of the screen in the yellow circle. The red line that links the two together is the alignment of the private wire that runs underneath all the farmland and underneath the M1 motorway that actually provides the physical link between the two sites. So that's how the Coca-Cola bottling plant gets its power. And I'm sure the Coca-Cola representatives will say how much power it gets when we move further forward. That was a reasonably straightforward planning permission to achieve, because Stephen did some excellent work in liaising with the local farmers to get their approval to run the wire under the ground, and it enabled the solar farm to come forward in 2016, 2017, and it was in 2017 when the power started to be provided. Next slide. In terms of the process that we went through at the start, we went through the pre-application inquiry process, and then we secured planning permission for the solar farm itself, and the council were broadly supportive of the solar farm coming forward, but we did have to overcome the green belt hurdle, because the site is in the green belt. It did have an impact on the openness of the green belt, And thankfully, the council at the time were supportive of the solar farm coming forward. That has, however, not been the case to date at officer level with the homes and the community facility that's been proposed. And that's why I've mentioned the local political dimension. Within Leeds itself, a lot of the volume house builders have brought forward schemes for housing development in Greenbelt, and they've been very vigorously defended by the elected members within Leeds City Council. It's almost a no build zone within the Greenbelt, and unfortunately that's overlay in and come into the sustainable housing that we've been promoting to date. To the west of Haigh Hall Farm. Now, we haven't given up on that yet, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But I just wanted to make it clear that at the minute we've got planning permission and a built-out solar farm, but we've still got a few hurdles to overcome with regard to the solar farm-powered housing and solar farm-powered community facility. Next slide. When we have engaged at officer level with the off-grid homes and community facilities, we've provided quite a lot of information to them. The top image on screen is a sort of a sketch plan and a sort of mini master plan showing how on the land to the west of Haigh Hall Farm, the housing and the church or community facility could be laid out along with associated landscaping. And we've also looked at very sustainable forms of housing on site, modular construction, very low energy requirements, different forms of housing. And that is then, we've tied that into the way in which Leeds Beckett University could then monitor the power taken from the housing and power provided by the solar farm itself. We need to work on that story more, and that will be part of the next stage of the work, the planning work that we're doing. Next slide. So just to round this off, I've been a massive supporter of the Haigh Hall Solar Farm for years. I think it's fantastic that it's come forward. It's brilliant that it's supporting the Coca-Cola bottling plant. You know, it's a great use of the energy. I would love to see this next stage of development come forward where you have some solar farm powered housing with batteries within inside the houses. Potentially the first solar farm powered church coming forward in the country. You know, really good local facility. What we need to do is wait for the local elections to take place, see who will be elected into the roles to sit within the council's climate emergency committee, who will be the sustainability champion for Leeds, and then we need to go and speak to them and see if we can get this political support from them to overcome this green belt hurdle that we're still fighting against. If we do get the political support, then our next practical stage would be to submit a planning application and hopefully achieve planning permission for that form of development. Next slide, please. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I did an excellent presentation. I did see a question that's raised really about roof panels. And that might be better picked up later on in the conversation, unless you want. I mean, I know there are issues with shading on roof panels, and I know when we looked at this, the orientation of these panels was so well positioned and the weather profiles that they were actually performing better than we thought they would be. And obviously when you put roof panels on, the efficiency of the panels often reduces due to the orientation of the roofs and local shading by other urban structures. But that might be a question better answered by Innova later on. when we move on to that. So we can always pick that up again. I'm going to move on straight on to Ian Caveen's presentation, because I think this links us nicely to we've got certainly a development of a solar farm that we can see that has taken place, and we're already putting some of that energy out, and that's going to Coca-Cola, which is really taking all of that energy or that decarbonised energy source and making maximise use of this. But it's also nice to see how schemes like this can involve the local community. So Ian, I'm going to hand it over to you. You're our retired architect and still practicing a little bit with this scheme, but allow you to introduce yourself and your role within this project.
Great, thank you. First slide, please.
I'm just waiting for it to load up. Just 1 second. Hopefully you'll see that in a second. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, I
Yeah.
can. Yeah. Well, I'm Ian Caveen. I'm a retired architect. I'm also on the church council and the steward for the church as well. So that keeps me quite busy in my retirement. The next slide, please. The existing chapel is located at the bottom of Haigh Hall Road and was built in 1856. The hall was later built in 1982 and the entrance foyer built in 2006. The existing chapel car park can accommodate 3 vehicles with on-street parking on Haigh Hall Road, Batley Road and Red Hill Drive. And as Haigh Hall Road is a designated bus route, car parking can be a bit of a problem, particularly with baptisms, weddings and funerals and circuit services. The chapel, due to its age, requires major work. However, due to the expanding mission of the church, the existing buildings are inadequate. Developing the existing site would not provide the accommodation requirements set by the church council. Next slide, please. And would not resolve the ongoing on-street car parking problem. The church council asked one of the members who knew Stephen Butterfield, a landowner in the area, that we were on a hunt for a site for a new community church, and he offered a piece of land on the understanding that it would form part of the new housing scheme serviced by the solar farm. New slide, please. And this shows the housing and the church and the car parking off Batley Road. The new church, slide 5, will bring many community benefits to West Arsley, and these will include a large foyer providing a coffee shop and have Wi-Fi access for the community. Slide 6, please. A multi-purpose worship space could be used as a conference and concert venue with overflow into the hall and meeting room for larger events. Slide 7, please. The chapel has already held brass band and choir concerts, and Leeds Beckett University would like to use the worship space as an occasional conference venue. Slide 8. As well as having one of the meeting rooms used as a permanent educational solar centre, which could be used by the church on a Sunday. The chapel already runs a food bank and is likely to expand, requiring more storage space. The luncheon club, which was thriving until COVID, may recommence using the kitchen in the hall. With different events going on simultaneously, it's vitally important that the folding partitions offer acoustic separation between meeting rooms, and there is plenty of storage space for various groups using the building. Where children and vulnerable adults are using the building, providing separate toilet for access and locking doors to public areas is also of prime importance. It's envisaged that the new community church will be open 7 days a week, managed by West Arsley Methodist Church, and therefore a separate small office will be required just off the foyer. Examples of energy efficient community buildings, slide 9. Examples of the community church buildings that I've been involved with prior to my retirement as architect for Byron Clark Roberts which now forms part of the Smithers Purslow Group. And the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. This shows the King's Church, Amersham. The church gains its heat from ground source heat pumps from piles driven into the ground, with heat exchangers located at first floor plant room level. The space heating is underfloor, the worship space is mechanically ventilated, and the perimeter meeting rooms naturally ventilated. The building envelope was designed to meet 2012 building regulations. Slide 11 shows the worship space, which is multi-purpose, can be used for other events. And slide 12 shows the hall acting as an overflow space, which is something that we're wanting to build into our new church. Next slide, please. St Andrew's Methodist and United Reformed Church, Rochdale, gains its heat from air source heat pumps. Slide 14. And the hidden behind the screen to the right of the building. Space heating is underfloor, the worship space being ventilated by monodraft wind catchers, allowing for passive stack ventilation controlled by motorised control dampers. Next slide, please. The Triangle Community Methodist Church, Bolton, gains its heat from condensing gas boilers located at first floor level. The space heating is underfloor, the worship space being ventilated by monodraft wind catchers. Slide 16. The perimeter meeting rooms are naturally ventilated. The roof over the cafe has a solar panels. Air source heat pumps were considered, but due to the close proximity of the housing and cost, the idea was shelved. And slide 17 shows the multi-purpose worship space, and slide 18, the cafe. Baden Village Preschool was designed to Passive House standards. Slide 19, please. Passive House being a very energy efficient form of building that is airtight and well insulated to reduce heat loss and uses mechanical and heat recovery systems to ventilate the building. Slide 20. The building is rated better and carbon neutral in its energy consumption. And the final slide, please. Sustainability in the use of solar power. As the community church will be located next to the solar farm, the intention will be to use the electricity as a source of heating, lighting and power, with the building storing the excess power in batteries. However, other heating sources like ground and air source heat pumps may be considered, with the heat pumps powered by the solar farm. A construction and service cost analysis will be undertaken prior to the planning submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Ian. And we've a great presentation, and we've got a few questions that hopefully we can pick up between John, Ian, and Stephen. I think there's certainly one with regard to developing a greenfield site, and is there no brownfield site? So that's Neve who's asked that question. And would there be any other areas that are suitable for solar farms? And I suppose really, I suppose we're sort of thinking about what was considered when both developing the solar farm and then proposing new developments. John, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the practicality that Stephen owns the land, and Stephen's prepared to allow the land to be developed and is prepared to gift the land. You know, there are brownfield sites in West Ardsley, Tingley, you know, nearby, but firstly you need to run the wire, the private wire, between the solar farm and those sites, and then you need to buy the land as well. The benefit of Stephen's proposal is that it's practicable, and it therefore can be implemented. You're not involving another party. You're not having to buy land. You're not having to then deal with the alignment of a new private wire to that site. The site that Stephen owns is next door, so that's one of the key benefits of it.
Ian, thanks for that, John. Ian, just thinking really on that same point, obviously we're proposing a new development, obviously then redeveloping the existing facility. I know you've already touched on this, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
Well, we did sort of look at other sites in the area, and the problem was that either the sites weren't big enough for the church and the car parking that's required. The other issue was that from a point of view of the proximity of where we are at the moment, there wasn't really any site large enough within the area of the chapel. We are serving the West Ardsley community, going up to Tingley and things like that. We're not serving the same community.
Thanks, Stephen. And for those who are looking, I'm talking to Jonathan Marshall, who's actually come in on another. You're muted at the moment, Stephen. You muted it. You're still muted at the moment. I certainly know, just while you're unmuting, one of the things that has impressed me when we've been working with. Yep, you are. Was really the connection with the local community. Stephen, so do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, obviously, it's been, because we've lived and worked in the community, it's been basically that we really want to get them integrated within the solar farm, and it's the local footpaths and people walk around the area. So it's a benefit for everybody around, and it's a win-win all the way through, because basically there's a community hub in there, like Ian's touched on. There's basically they've got the food bank and everything, and everybody in the community is connected there. So we're a big supporter of the chapel and community hub, and integrating it within the project. I mean, it'd be great to provide power into there, and also if we could build some sustainable homes or experimental homes. And the main thing on all of this is, if you go in pounds, shillings and pence in old money, it's all self-funding, so basically it would actually happen, but it's a green belt hurdle. What John hasn't picked up on before, all this land was formed open cast in the 1960s by British Coal, and then in the 80s it was areas of the land was actually landfill, but it was an inert, and then in the early 90s it was reopened cast again by a company called Cobex. So it has been an industrial type thing, but the green belt stigma that sits over it. And what we were looking to do, and why the project was looking to be great, is because we would look to offset all of that and improve it and do it a carbon plus. So basically, on the area that we was looking to put the ecological homes, we've looked like with yourself, Chris, in the past, and all of that thing. And what we would do is gift more land to the community along the footpaths, which would make up for the amount of properties. We would put that in with trees so we could do some carbon capture. And then what we would actually do then is basically fund the photovoltaic, which is on the existing solar farm, with the planning permission, and then we could actually fund that through. And you guys can go on the back of that, and it can benefit Leeds and obviously the university. So we think it's a good solution, but it's just like John says, it's over the green bit hurdle. That's a problem.
I think obviously some people get and me as well is like you do want to protect the green space, but one thing that I've noticed with some of these projects is, once you remove the human footprint from it, is we do start to see plants regrowing. And I know you certainly with the some species and animals coming back that weren't there before. So you'd previously sent through a video for us of some of those events, and I think there's you've also got the floodplains at the bottom, which had a nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so wheels within wheels, the consideration was we put around 25% down for regreening and planting of trees, and we've connected a wildlife corridor from the Haigh Hall Springwood down to the floodplain at the bottom, and that was done by John. And basically what we are doing is we've on the farming side of things, we've reduced fertilizers, and there's about 55% now that's not done with fertilizer, it's just through natural farming. That helps the flood zone at the bottom in the flood area, because we don't actually put fertilizers and man-made fertilizers, and with what's happening in Ukraine around the world at the moment and prices, so it doesn't really affect us. So we're sustainable, and we are actually still farming the land. And one of the main things with the solar farm originally was that we made sure that we could still actually farm under there. So it was one of the main priorities that when the developers took the farm, is that we still grazed sheep and looked after the wildlife. And we've got barn elves coming back, we've got wild hares coming back into the area. We've got, there's quite a lot of sustainable thing, and it's a feel-good factor, and that's the main thing for me.
Thanks, Stephen. I can see there's more questions coming up, but they're starting to go over into some of the issues that may be dealt with by Robin and Lucas. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Robin, first, to give us a bit of information on the solar hubs and Innova's work.
Thanks very much, Chris. Before we start, Donna, have you received our presentation, which I ineptly emailed over, or not?
I don't appear to have had a presentation from you, Robin, but if you send me it really quickly now, I can...
It's all right, Donna. We'll just share on our screen.
If you want to share your screen, that's probably easier.
My apologies. Okay. Perfect. So if we go to the next page. I thought I'd start by introducing who Innova is, what we've done, and what we're going to cover in this presentation. First of all, I'm Robin Dummett, a director at Innova. Lucas here is the technical director. I'll introduce what we see as an exciting change in renewables, and there's a whole series of technical innovations that Lucas will go through at the end. So first of all, Innova, we developed, built and operated the site extension at Haigh Hall. We use some new technology, particularly bifacial panels. And now we're going to the next stage where we are looking to add batteries and increase the scale of the site and potentially add a hydrogen plant too. So that's what we've done in Haigh Hall. Our mission is to provide large energy users with all their energy and waste needs in the most environmental way, using a range of solutions. So I've noticed some questions about rooftop solar, wind. Our view is you use the best solution that is most appropriate for the local area. And I'd like to say that Haigh Hall really is very exciting because it's ahead of the curve. And that's really thanks to Stephen and to Coke, that we've been able to do something that's ahead of the market in general. But we think the renewable market's changing. And we think that in the future, really, rather than having renewables in fields away from users, we're going to be actually twinning the two together to get the best possible local solution. And finally, just a little note to say, we've got a lot of sites in the UK. So we are seeing this happen at the moment. And we believe over the next 5 to 10 years, the technology will develop. So as we go through this, what you'll see is we could do some things today and certain things have never been done. And we believe that we'll find the answers in the next 5 or 10 years. Okay. So I'll go through the phases. The first phase is the existing solar farm. So as you can see here, this is about 40 acres worth of solar. John showed you the planning side of it. The pros of it is it's entirely green. Interestingly enough, renewables now are easily the lowest cost electricity, far cheaper than nuclear, far cheaper than any of the fossil fuels. And it's tried and tested. So everybody is with the answers. The disadvantages is it's intermittent. We have when the sun doesn't shine, we don't produce electricity, and there's a little bit of a waste because on a normal solar farm that's connected to the grid, you actually have transmission losses as the electricity is pumped around the UK. So that's our existing site. The next phase was the private wire. So here you'll see how the solar site was physically connected to Coke site. So you can see the blue solar site with the nice purple cable route over to Coke to physically supply them electricity. Somebody asked about rooftop solar. To give you an idea, we love rooftop, so we think it's a great thing to do. Depends on the roof, but also their scale. Rooftops tend to be substantially smaller than what you can put onto the ground, so they are very unlikely to be able to produce enough electricity to take a site off grid, but we think they're fantastic where it's appropriate. So with a private wire, the pros are you avoid 2/3 of the electric bill. So most of the people's electric bills on companies isn't for the energy, it's for taxes, carbon, transmission losses and the like. So by directly connecting, it's financially more viable. The second, for me, a more important point is it's greener. So that means you're saving any transmission losses by directly connecting between the generation and the use. Disadvantages are it's complex. You're connecting one part of the network to another, and grid issues are always complicated, but they're known. We've done this many times. So it is something that can be sorted out, but it just requires a bit of time, effort and money. And finally, it's still intermittent, so the solar farm can only ever provide 20 to 40% of a customer use. Okay, so that's where we got to today. This phase 3 is what we're looking at doing next. So we're adding the battery, which is the green part, which is surprisingly small, and increasing the amount of generation up with the darker blue. The reason we're doing this is by using a battery, we can actually shift the generation of electricity. So we can actually store the electricity we produce in the middle of the day and supply it at night. This is the only way that we'll be able to take a customer off grid completely. The other thing the battery could do is it provides grid stability and trading. So the grid stability means that if there's an outage in the local grid for Coke, the battery can continue to provide stabilization. The disadvantage is the battery itself is expensive and it's not financially viable at the moment based on shifting of electricity only. There needs to be an element of trading with the battery to make it financially viable. Our belief is that this will change, just like solar becoming cheaper, but at the moment, the business model is only partially viable. And the second one is it's early stage. So we're still in the process of working out how to choose between powering the battery, trading the battery, and the private wire. So we know how the technology works, but we need to refine it. Okay. Phase 4, which is after the battery, hopefully, and the new solar is working, is a hydrogen facility. So that's the yellow element. It's relatively small. It's an electrolysis plant, so it's supplied by the green energy. So when we generate, we'll have the choice with either we charge the battery, we supply the hydrogen, the private wire, or export. The pros are it's very green. It means that we can power vehicles, and generally it's the heavier goods vehicles with green hydrogen produced by solar and only producing water out the back. So that's highly attractive. The cons are, well, it needs a constant supply of green energy because hydrogen is entirely produced by green energy. And that is a lot cheaper than the grid energy. So we have to find a way of being able to supply the hydrogen plant 24/7, 365 days of the year. And the second point is an electrolysis plant is a chemical plant. So scale is important. Large plants are substantially cheaper than smaller plants. And the last point I would say is actually hydrogen, green hydrogen is now viable for fuel. It is not yet viable for heating if you compare it directly to gas. So that's where the scale and the constant supply become more important. And there's very few hydrogen sites that actually work in this manner. So again, this is a new technology that will have to be refined over time. Finally, the last element, and this isn't so much at Haigh Hall, but I thought I'd add it so you could see it. It's the waste to energy. The idea and concept is that we would be able to take anybody's waste, as in any customer's waste, and we have a waste unit that doesn't actually convert it into carbon dioxide and pump it into the air. 96% of the waste goes into biochar, which is an extremely good fertilizer, which can be used within the farms. So you convert waste into biochar, heat and hydrogen. So the concept is that we're able to remove waste and provide any customer all of the energy they want, whether it's heat or electricity. The problem with it is it's very new. We only have one plant, and as far as I'm aware, there is only one plant in the UK. So we are developing it. So it's at least 5 years away before we have a commercial plant that we can roll out. But we see this as the future. So I think in summary, before I pass on to Lucas, do you want to do the next one? If you look, here is the nice green picture of what we've done. Where we see over the next 5 to 10 years is this will be the normal thing, but it will be much larger hubs, which are chosen in sites with the local community and the local councils to put in the best place, whether it's on brownfield or whether it's close to industrial usage. They'll probably be battery led because it's that stability the battery provides to provide 24-hour power that's essential, with generation from solar, wind or waste, depending on what's the most appropriate. And in the UK at the moment, planning will simply not allow you to do onshore wind in England, definitely. You'll have some form of storage, which will either be a battery or a mechanical storage or hydrogen, with the bulk of the use local. So that's electricity, heat, removal of waste, and also hydrogen and electrical charging for vehicles. That's where we see the future over the next 10 years. And with that, I will pass over to Lucas.
Thanks, Robin. So as Robin talked about, we're very much focused on technological innovation and the opportunities in the future. But right on Haigh Hall, there's actually a fair bit of innovation that we've implemented. So I'll talk about one of the key areas, which is bifacial modules. So the conventional solar module that's shown here on the left, that has on the front side of the module is where the sun hits, generates electricity. But on the back side of that module is just a white sheet, and that doesn't generate any electricity. But in the move over to bifacial modules, as you see on the right, that back sheet has been replaced by a clear piece of glass. And what this allows the module to do is harvest energy not only from the front, but also reflected energy from the back. And this is really important because module technology, it's been around for decades. However, we're getting to the point where it's really very much incremental gains that we have to find in the technology to increase the viability of projects. And there's several key benefits. One, higher efficiency. So again, we can harvest energy from the front and the back of the module. The modules themselves are much sturdier. So you have glass on both sides. So this means we can put the modules in places that maybe you aren't able to put conventional modules. It also means that you can use a bit less metal in the structure because the modules can withstand more. And as a consequence of the new technology, as a consequence of how they're built, you can also get longer warranty on the modules. So the module manufacturers feel as though these products will last longer than the conventional technology, and the rate at which the modules degrade is also less. So they'll again warranty for a longer period of time. So what you have is really a step change improvement in technology. But as with everything, as with every change, it comes at a cost. So this plot down on the left here, it's a bit hard to read probably, but you see that line on the top, that blue, that is bifacial technology over the last about 2 years or so, and the black and red, those are conventional technologies. So bifacial really didn't take off because there was just too big of a price difference between the two. However, over time, these eventually converged as the modules became more widespread, and technology providers have invested heavily in them. So our approach really, this was a new technology when we deployed it on Haigh Hall, and there was still a fair bit of uncertainty about the performance of the modules. So we took the chance. We looked at the research. We looked at what the technology providers were offering, but we wanted to verify that indeed, this technology was going to be viable for future projects. So one of the things we did is we added a degree of sensors throughout the site that allowed us to really measure what these bifacial modules were providing. And the key things we were trying to determine is really how much gain is this module going to provide. The manufacturers, they have some estimates, but of course they over egg the estimates. There's some research on it, but there's just not a lot of data available in the marketplace. So what we wanted to look at is the key factors that influence bifacial gain. One, the reflectivity of the ground. So we're trying to study, okay, if we have different ground surfaces, if we have grass, if we have tall grass, short grass, if we have stone, the different types of materials that you could put under the structure, what could the impact of that be on the bifacial gain? Also, the quality of the light. So if you have a sunny site or a cloudy site, the benefit of these bifacial modules can vary. And that's important for us as we look around the country at different sites to determine what we expect to get from these bifacial modules. And then lastly, the design of the mounting structure. So the mounting structure itself, the more reflected light you can get from the bottom, the more gain you can get. So what we did at Haigh Hall is we put, again, the suite of sensors out there to measure these different parameters, but then also we put one structure that had monofacial modules and the rest of the array bifacial modules. So what we could do is we could take all the meteorological data and compare the output of the two different types of modules right on site to give us an indication of what the gain was. And I won't go in great detail on these plots, but if you look at the one in the top right, we see a clear measure. So albedo, that's basically a measure of the reflectivity of the surface. And the gain is the amount of energy gained from the modules. As we see, there's a clear trend as the surface becomes more reflective, you end up with more gain from the modules. And then looking down at the performance impact, so we expected, of course, to get higher performance from these bifacial modules, but there could be other factors that could influence performance. So what we've been able to isolate is show clearly that as the bifacial gain increases, we get higher performance from the site. So we're truly getting the benefit of this bifacial technology. It's not just something that the manufacturers are pitching, and we have clear proof to carry forward into our future projects. So this is again just one example of the technological innovation. We're looking on future projects. There's a new type of module that's come out that has a different module structure that we're deploying on projects this year. So very much about taking these incremental steps, improving the technology, and carrying forward to see what's next.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So Chris, back over to you.
Sorry, yep. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Lucas. I think that was really useful and probably helps us answer some of the questions that are a bit more technical. I think it's also useful to see for future projections of technology and how they mix or can be mixed. I remember when, so one of the questions that was asked quite early on is almost why position this out where it was positioned, and how almost why we're not really doing things with the local community. But I remember us doing an exercise where we were actually looking at the energy losses from the energy loss from the cable to Coca-Cola. I remember that with a standard property at that time, we could power something like 52 houses if we were able to convert that energy straight to housing to the houses that could be positioned there. But it's almost like we've got this situation where we don't want to do this on our own in our own backyard, like how do we find suitable sites? How are you doing that? I mean, is it a combination of landowners coming forward, or is it also looking at how we map out the country? How are you doing it at the moment?
So what we do is to do a renewable hub, you're going to need to have a grid connection. You need to have land, and you're going to need to have planning and a user. So what we tend to do is at the moment in the UK, things tend to be driven by grid. There's a shortage of available places in the country where you can actually connect to the network to export, and you need that export. So the first thing we do is find out where there is grid available. Once we've done that, we will look within the area of that grid, because you can only put a cable to that grid within a certain area, say 5 kilometres. And we will assess all the land within that area for where is the best place to put a solar farm. And so we will consider environmental areas like triple SIs, brownfield, greenfield, any other special policies that the local authorities have designated. And we'll normally come down to 4 or 5 areas. And off the back of those areas, we will then look for landowners who are happy to work with us. So by the end of that, we should be relatively clear on where the ideal sites are. And we may not be able to use the ideal site if the landowner doesn't want to work with us, but we will be relatively clear that we have one of the best, if not the best, sites in the local area. So that's the process today. The process tomorrow I perceive being rather different. I actually see zoning from the local authorities in a very similar way to they do on residential. So actually we will work with the local authority over a longer period of time and agree with them where the ideal place for a renewable hub is. So, you know, that's our preferred route, because that will end up with the best solution. And that will take into account where the users are, also where the grid is and where the available land is. So we think that somewhere over the next 10 years, we'll flip from the current style of actually doing it ourselves to a style of working in a more coherent way with the local authorities and local community.
Thank you. I've certainly been involved in a number of meetings with government and the sort of regional energy hubs, and they're scratching their heads on how to do this. So one of the reasons I pulled this group of people together is this is where it's happening. These are the people who are able to actually respond to some of the challenges and integrate this energy. So it's certainly not easy. We've got a lot of questions on the combination of wind and photovoltaics. I don't know whether that's something that either you or Lucas could answer or allude to. So there's people asking about photovoltaics as opposed to wind, or and I'm assuming that people are also putting forward an opinion on combining the two energy sources. Any observations, thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say from a resource standpoint, I mean, the two are quite complementary, right? It's typically windy at night, sunny in the day. And actually, we have a project that we're working on now where we have a shared interconnection, where we've got a large solar farm and then a wind farm just right next to it. So it's definitely, you know, something from a technology standpoint that's very attractive. And when you bring in the batteries, you know, it's really a perfect trifecta, right? There are other planning considerations with wind that you don't have with solar. So Robin can talk a bit more about the planning aspects, but from a technology standpoint, it's something that we are very interested in and are pursuing wherever possible.
And on the planning side, at the moment, onshore wind is considered more invasive. In other words, it's a large stick with some wind turbines on it, so it's more visually impactful. There are things such as a modulation and a flicker effect. So in the UK, for whatever reason, the government has taken a stance that they are relatively against onshore wind. What we're seeing on the ground is onshore wind, we believe, will come back in Wales and Scotland. We think it is more problematic in England. So on our sites in Scotland and Wales, where it's appropriate, will seek to combine wind and solar. We see that as a great combination because it helps with the intermittency across the site. So that's where we would like to go. And frankly, we will be driven very much by planning policy here and what we're allowed to do. And from our side, what makes sense with the local community.
Thank you for that. There's a question about the district heating scheme, but I think that was potentially what you could do rather than what you are doing, isn't it? It was theoretical, but it says, is the district heating system considered for the new development or district energy? But I suppose, what could it be considered for? So that you I think you briefly discussed the potential of waste to heat. Was that?
Oh, sorry. So this one's for me.
Yeah, sorry.
The district heating we see working very well with the waste to energy. We see that as a great way. In the future, and I think Stephen might have something on this one, is we see when hydrogen becomes cheaper, green hydrogen becomes cheaper, we see district heating coming through. So to give you an idea, green hydrogen to replace diesel and petrol is about £7 or £8 a kilo. Heating is about 1.5. So heating is substantially lower priced than transport. So there's a time here until you can actually make the economics work for heating. So at the moment, if we were doing a development, we'd be keen to use district heating with our waste to energy because, you know, we're already producing heat and it's economically viable. In the longer term, we'd like to be using hydrogen as well, or mixing it with gas as an interim step. Stephen, do you have anything you'd want to say on that?
I'm fine with that one. That's no problem. But going back to our site, no, we've not considered district heating. If there's a question on that one. We just considered the battery, and the reason what Robin was saying, the reason why it can self-fund is because the cost of batteries are so high at the moment, but we would factor that into there so it would be stood in the power in there on powered properties. There's another way to power them. We could actually do some, we could actually put solar panels on the roof and do a water system that way and heat the system that way. There is that one as well that might be considered in the future.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Lucas. I think that's useful. If we can all stick around, because what I will do if we have time at the end, put an open floor to see if there's any other questions. But really, thank you very much for that. Certainly, I'm learning all the time about what we're doing at Haigh Hall and what the potential is for the future with our energy mix. I'll now move over to James Taylor at Coca-Cola Europacific partners, and how they're utilising the green energy, and also what Coca-Cola are doing more broadly in Wakefield rather than Leeds, I think.
Thank you, Chris.
James.
I'll share my screen, so I've got the slides. So he says as he pulls them up. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, they're great, James. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So, like Chris said, I'll kind of just go over a bit what we do at Wakefield, and kind of, I guess, try and put a bit of context into what we, you know, how the green energy is used at our site. So, myself, I'm the environment manager for the Wakefield site at Wakefield, the Coca-Cola site at Wakefield, and I've been in the role for about 2.5 years. So I've been in role as we've expanded the solar farm last year, and yeah. So if I just move on now for a bit of a kind of context for the Wakefield site. So the Wakefield site is the largest soft drinks bottling site in Europe by volume. We've got 10 production lines. We've got a mixture of both canning and PET bottle lines, and we do the full range from 330ml cans up to your 2.5 litre PET bottle products. Off that, we can produce up to 210 million unit cases of product a year, and we've also got a distribution hub on site which has capacity for 40,000 pallets and can handle 4 million pallet movements a year. So it's quite a large scale operation. It's a bit hard to get your head around the numbers sometimes, even when you're on site. But it also, based on the scale of that, it's quite a large part of the sustainability picture within the wider company. So Wakefield has been on 100% renewable electricity for over 10 years. That's the same with all of our GB sites, both offices and manufacturing. And then obviously we've had the solar farm supplying the Wakefield site specifically since 2017. In terms of where the business is at the minute in terms of our targets, So we committed to a goal last year of reaching net zero emissions by 2040, and that goal includes the full supply chain, including our scope 3 emissions. So it covers our hauliers and suppliers as well. So it's so it covers the full scope of the business. And then within that, there's a 30% reduction by 2030 target as kind of the midway goal in the wider 20-year plan. So if you just go on to energy sourcing, this specifically around the solar farm. So the solar farm at Haigh Hall produces 20% of Wakefield's energy a year. And obviously that increased up to 20% last year with the expansion. And on site, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 62% over the past decade. This was driven initially by our first carbon reduction target, which was to reduce emissions up to 2025. So obviously we're already ahead of that, and our next set of targets have now been set for the 2040. I think the real benefit, as has been discussed, I think already this afternoon, is it's a sustainable source of energy. It's green. It's close by. It's off grid as well, so there's less of a grid reliance for site. And I think especially in the first half of this year, it's really protecting us against market volatility and utilities. And I think the first 6 months of this year has kind of really shown us what impacts events around the world can have on utilities costs. So having this off grid source of energy is not just green, it's also valuable from a financial point of view as well. But I think, again, as has been discussed this afternoon, there's also a lot of environmental benefits from the site at Haigh Hall. We've got dual use with the grazing land for the sheep in and around the solar panels, the wildlife corridors that have been developed, the encouraging of the regeneration of biodiversity. Myself and some volunteers were up at the site a couple of weeks ago, taking part in a community event to plant some trees as part of the Jubilee canopy programme. And we had a great tour from Stephen as well around the solar farm, looking at, I'm sure Stephen will be able to correct me if I've got the numbers wrong, but they've planted up to 20,000 trees on the property since the solar farm scheme kicked off. And I think it kind of adds to, it's not just green energy, it's a great resource for the local community, and it's also providing additional environmental benefits along with the biodiversity, but also the regeneration of floodplains and natural flood defences for the local area as well. And then just touching again on some of the other bits that we're doing outside of the solar farm. So obviously 2040 to net zero is a large commitment. It's not something that one solar farm or one project is going to achieve in itself. Last year, there was an announcement of an £11 million investment over the next 3 years to move all of our manual handling equipment from LPG to lithium-ion batteries. So that's been completed at Wakefield already. There's approximately 70 forklift trucks on site have moved from LPG over to the renewable energy electrical source, and that's taken 1,500 tonnes of carbon out of our site's carbon footprint. And also last year we replaced the diesel that we use on site for our HGV shunters with HVO. So it's a vegetable oil based fuel. There was no modification needed for any of the equipment, and just by switching to that fuel source, we're able to save 80% on our overall carbon footprint. 80% on the carbon footprint compared to the diesel. And that investment is it's continued the whole time I've been at Wakefield. In the 2.5 years I've been on site, we've had two new production lines, which has generated a number of jobs as well in the area, including one that was commissioned during COVID, which was a challenge. But it kind of shows that that investment is still there in Wakefield, and then the impact that has around jobs, the community. We have programs around supporting local charities. We have an apprentice scheme as well. So it's a wide-reaching. It's a big site. It's a wide-reaching opportunity, touching in various different areas. I think that kind of touches on what we do. It's probably quite brief. I think I might have rushed it a little bit, but I think it kind of gives you an idea of what we do at the Wakefield site, and kind of where we're looking to go over the next 18 to 20 years, from a carbon and net zero point of view.
I think that was great, James. I think to see how some of these major manufacturing organisations are managing to decarbonise their production or operation, I think is really important for a lot of our industrial partners in the industrial sector, because it does seem an impossible feat. Just one of the questions I've got, obviously you're taking 20% of your energy from Haigh Hall Farm, and then you said that all your electrical energy was renewable. How do you sort of justify that? Is that where you're purchasing it from?
Yeah, it's I guess it's similar to how, you know, if you get your domestic supply as a renewable source, you know, it's based on that same sort of certified principle. And I think that's where the solar farm in particular is a benefit for the Wakefield site, because it is that off-grid, it's that dedicated supply, and you know, it's that local source of green energy. So yeah, the overall green supply is kind of based on that principle of similar to domestic green supply.
Thank you. And I think somebody's asking for a reminder of the alternative fuel that was used in diesel.
It's HVO, so it's hydro-treated vegetable oil. Hydro-treated vegetable oil.
And I think some of these questions are, you know, it's how we get this whole mix together. How and it is very much a combination of different options, and it seems that everybody's transferring quite rapidly to new source of renewable energy. So actually sort of learning from what others are doing is really important, because there does seem to be so many options, and knowing what works and what might not be the right route to follow seems to be really important. Thanks ever so much for that, James. Just because time's ticking away quite quickly, I'm going to move on, but there are a number of questions that are building up that hopefully we'll pick up at the end of the presentation. But that was really useful. I think we're starting to see really why I found this interesting and why I wanted to pull some of these people together, and certainly the work that I've seen of Andy Boyle and Otley Energy in terms of like involving communities and working out how we actually sort of reduce the energy demand, I think is really important as well. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Andy, if that's okay, to give us an overview of what you're doing.
Can you see my screen? Can you see my slide? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about our work with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, Leeds City Council and the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership on the Better Homes Hub, which is a one-stop shop model, a regional one-stop shop model for delivering retrofit, but delivering regeneration and wider net zero goals. So my name's Andy Boyle. I'm a director of Otley Energy. We are a community benefit society, so a community energy company, but actually we spent most of the last 3 years working with these partners, looking more broadly at the business and finance models around net zero, but over the last 2 years really focusing on the development of the Better Homes Hub. And I thought I'd just start by talking about the context that Chris invited me to speak. So Chris and I sit on the Leeds Climate Commission Housing Group, which I chair. It's got two obvious strands to it, one around new build and one around retrofit, which I'm going to talk about. But I just thought I'd give a nod really to Leeds City Council's work, which forms a large part of our discussions from a new build perspective. And what I really see is their ambitious development of the local plan. which is really taking this joined up approach, really thinking about development in its widest sense in terms of sustainability, which has huge overlaps, obviously, with the work that we're doing. So first of all, I just want to talk a bit of context about the joined up approach, or the systems-based approach which we're adopting, which really lends itself to the discussions that we've already had, and then talking about specifically what we're doing with the Better Homes Hub. So UK Net Zero strategy was released last year. I think really importantly for me, it starts to try to shift the narrative around net zero and talk about all of the benefits to net zero. So rather than being a cost and a challenge, really focusing on the opportunities. Down at the bottom there, our homes in this vision of a brighter future, our homes are warm, comfortable and affordable. And that sits alongside all of those wider benefits to the economy, to jobs, to green space and the environment. And I think that's a really important part of this idea of trying to sell the transition within communities and sell the idea of retrofit, which is a tough nut to crack. The strategy then goes on to say that if we're going to deliver all of these benefits, that we need a joined up or whole systems approach, particular focus on the relationships between the sectors, as we've been hearing about today, but really starting to think about the wider opportunity and the wider sense of a whole system approach. And I think this sits in contrast to what we see with the current government around light touch government. So it's a recognition that we need coordination and to bring these things together, like we were talking about zoning in terms of solar farms and that sort of thing. And for me, there's 4 really good reasons around a systems approach or a joined up approach. One is that recognition, coming back to the vision for the brighter future, that there's huge social value to be had. But if things are left to individual projects and individual companies and individual stakeholders, we won't maximise the benefit across these projects. Secondly, you've got those really important connections between the sectors, things like housing, which I'll talk about, and the energy system and the transport system, but then right down into the integration between different technologies within homes and within neighbourhoods, like district heating and that sort of thing. Really important bit around systems, the systems approach, is acknowledging that there's a huge amount of barriers to the transition and that these have negative feedback loops. And so to tackle them, we need to tackle them all, and we need to tackle them in a joined up way. And then working across all of that is that the need to bring all stakeholders along. All stakeholders have a role to play in the transition, and importantly have influence across stakeholders. So bringing them all along and building capacity across all stakeholder groups. So the way that we're approaching this within the Better Homes Hub, we've been working with 200 plus organisations now at a national level and a regional level, trying to bring all of those different stakeholder groups together into the design of the hub. Really importantly, as part of the UK Green Buildings Council Accelerate Cities programme, we're working with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but also Greater London Authority, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, Newcastle, Edinburgh, really, and this is about the regions coming together to figure out how we tackle retrofit at a regional scale. And I think really importantly as well is the role that Leeds City Council and West Yorkshire Housing Partnership are playing. Between them, they have 175,000 homes, which really starts to provide that really tangible foundation to the work that we want to do. And just to emphasise that the design of the programme is really, this is a simplification and obviously very complicated in itself, but really trying to make that point that the whole design of the programme is really looking down in the detail of all of those different barriers, starting with the fact that there is very low levels of retrofit because there simply isn't a compelling offer for most people. Things are shifting as the cost of energy is becoming more and more relevant, but we're really starting from a low base in terms of demand, which in itself has knock-on effects to the lack of a supply chain, which itself means normal builders aren't promoting energy efficiency, but also homeowners who want to get work done can't find the supply chain. And The heart of it, arguably, is the need for really ambitious and consistent long-term government policy around fiscal incentives, but things like minimum energy standards, but actually recognising that that kind of ambitious policy just isn't politically palatable yet. So there's work for the sector to actually do to help government lay the foundations for that kind of ambitious policy. So we take at its heart, if you think about what we're building up from retrofit. We're talking about a whole house approach. So thinking about the relationship on the right-hand side between things like insulation, technology, fabric improvements, but then really importantly, recognising that homes just sit at the as part of the wider energy system. So recognising that, as we were talking about earlier in terms of grid balancing, really important element of the transition within our homes. So what are we going to do about storage within homes, use of EV, batteries, things like time of use tariffs to start a balanced supply and demand. And then the approach that we're taking and really focusing on in West Yorkshire, because of the success that Leeds have with this kind of scheme, is really thinking about how we move beyond just thinking about individual homes to actually tackling entire neighbourhoods. So Leeds have success of working across tenure, working with social landlords, private homeowners, to take upgrades to a community, but take them as part of a regeneration approach. So really selling retrofit as part of a wider opportunity to improve communities, with huge benefits to do it at this sort of scale, and to really accelerate the transition. And then the next logical extension of that is that if we're going to be going into communities to talk about retrofit, to talk about simple regeneration, is to take that as an opportunity to engage with them far more widely about the transition, bringing things like district heating systems, that sense of what are we going to do in terms of the local energy system, but going further in terms of mobility, 15-minute neighbourhoods, what services do we have in communities, and how are we going to best use green space in and around towns and villages in the way that we've talked about today. And this is really building on an emerging, and really this idea of a net zero neighbourhood and this broader approach is getting traction across all of the regions that we're working with through the UK GBC work. And then alongside that is how do we fund these things? So BEIS have just funded, I think they announced last week that they've provided £1.5 million worth of funding to develop this idea of a blended funding model for neighbourhoods. So how do we unlock all of this social value that we're talking about by taking a joined up approach to projects within neighbourhoods around energy system, but also resilience, green space, etc. And therefore, how do we unlock and bring together different budgets from different stakeholders to improve the economics and allow these things to be scaled? And so at the heart of the Better Homes Hub is this idea of a one-stop shop model. So there's existing models for private homeowners, which take homeowners through that process of understanding the work that needs to be done to the home, phasing it depending on what they want to do with their homes, but then engaging with the supply chain and project managing it and making sure that it's a success and monitoring performance. But then the approach that we're taking in West Yorkshire is extending that out to all private homeowners, private landlords, social landlords, but then really bringing that journey together across a neighbourhood so that you're taking entire neighbourhoods through that process. And then at a regional level, doing exactly the same, just on a much bigger scale, understanding the housing stock and taking our entire housing stock through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I think that's really useful, and I think one of the things that's always impressed me is actually overcoming those problems, the financial barriers, and actually bringing homes together, and how you create regions. And certainly the presentations that I've seen at the Climate Change Commission, when when people are talking about future development and future plans and how they might look in terms of a street scene. I like the idea that just seems to be quite new to me of the 15-minute neighbourhood. But what do you see that as potentially embracing? Is that the energy supply? Is that everything as well as local amenities? How practically how's that unfolding within the scope of what you see?
I think it's a really good example. So you've got the link between homes and mobility, because effectively 15-minute neighbourhood on one level is about mobility, isn't it? It's about reducing the need to travel, if you think about the hierarchy. And so you've got links between homes and that, so things like EV charging at homes, but also community car share schemes, community car clubs. But then I think for me that the 15-minute neighbourhood is really looking, and I think this is the really powerful link to regeneration, is thinking about that they talk about community-based asset. I'm getting the phrase wrong, but they talk about these things as assets. So what does a community have within the community? What services do they have? And what would they need to really start to reduce the need to travel out of that community, which obviously has massive knock-on effects to the really hyper-local economy. If people aren't traveling out of that community and are buying services locally, products and services locally, you really start to see that compounding and bringing together and maximising that social value, I think.
Thank you for that, Andy. And I know certainly one of the early schemes that I think we got involved in Leeds, when we were looking at the impact of retrofit or neighbourhood retrofits. Whilst we were focusing on energy efficiency, the real value was what it did to the community in transforming their opinion and their self-worth within that community. And I think, I do see that happening with some of the schemes and some of the things that we've touched at with Stephen. But I'm going to pass on because we were pushing with time. But please stick around because I want to open the mic up at the end for questions from the rest. But I'm going to pass on to Fiona, who's part of the group that I work in, Fiona's been doing some really quite nice work, I think, with hydrogen or future prospects of hydrogen integration, as well as some other energy efficiency and behaviour work. But Fiona, I'll allow you to introduce yourself and also the work that you're doing and how it might, and just a brief insight. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So I hope that you can see the slides that I've got popping up there. Is that okay? Okay, fabulous. So I'm Fiona Fylan and I'm a health psychologist. So what on earth is a health psychologist doing working in this arena, you might ask? Well, health psychology is all about how you change behaviour. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to do in terms of people's energy use, trying to change the way in which they use energy, and in this case, heat their homes. So why are we interested in what the public think about hydrogen? Well, this idea started in Leeds with the Leeds Citygate project. The idea was that we are never going to reach net zero whilst we're using gas central heating to heat and cook our homes. We can never retrofit them so that they're going to enable us to reach net zero. So what's our alternatives? Well, one alternative is an electric future, but not all homes are suitable for that. And the grid system would need substantial upgrading if that is going to cope with the population using electric and no gas. So what could we do then? So the idea was, let's have a look at converting our gas supply from methane, natural gas, to hydrogen gas. But then immediately, everybody working in the sector was thinking there is no way that the public will accept having hydrogen in their homes. They're going to be too anxious about it. They won't want it. So the team at the Leeds Sustainability Institute at Leeds Beckett University were commissioned to undertake insight research into how would the public respond to 100% hydrogen conversion. What questions do they have? What are their concerns? And how can we explain a conversion to them? So why is this research important? Well, what we want are informed customers who are in a position to make good personal choices about their energy supply. What we don't want is people having unwarranted concerns. So they've been reading fake news about hydrogen, for instance. They've got concerns that are not founded in evidence. Potentially they could reject a hydrogen option, and the whole future of hydrogen could be at risk if there's an unfounded public rejection of hydrogen. But on the other hand, we don't want unwarranted enthusiasm as well. People have got perhaps unrealistic expectations of what hydrogen will do to their homes, to their bills, to the region's economy. This could lead eventually to complacency. People are not asking the right questions, and eventually a loss of trust. So our team, in phase 1 of this research, we first needed to talk to people to find out, how do you even have this conversation about hydrogen? We then did a study to have a look at population groupings in terms of how people accept hydrogen. And then we ran some workshops to explore, how do you present this information, to co-design the information, to answer the questions that people have got in a way in which they understand. So I go straight to the population study. So we're trying to understand what proportion of the population have different beliefs about hydrogen and about the worth of net zero and making changes to move towards that. So it's a large-scale survey of over 1,000 people across the UK. And what we found were 5 different groupings. So the first group, we're calling these the acceptors. They're about 20% of the population, or they were at the point at which they did this survey. They accept changes to their lives to reduce climate change, and they welcome the prospect of a change of gas, and that change being hydrogen. Group 2, so this group we're calling them the cautious, so they're 28% of the population. They are, again, already making changes to their lifestyle, but they are more cautious. They've got more questions and concerns about the move to hydrogen. Group 3, the biggest group, we're calling them the disinterested, 30% of the population. You know what? They don't care. They don't feel they know anything about it. They don't particularly want to. Group 4, small group, the unconvinced. They're not too sure about it. They don't know anything about it. And they really have got other things to think about. They're not interested in finding out more. And then the 5th group, 12% of the population, we're calling these the rejectors. They don't believe in climate change. They're reluctant to make lifestyle changes to try and reduce the energy they use. And they're strongly against a change in the gas. They don't want this to be hydrogen. So there were our 5 groupings. So remember, we want to know, how do you tell people about hydrogen in a way that allows them to make an informed choice? So we worked with these 3 groups in the middle, so those who don't have strong feelings one way or the other. And we brought them together with experts to, we call them deliberative workshops, because they're deliberating a series of questions and topics. So they were given information on a potential conversion, and we explored with them what their initial views are, what questions they've got and what concerns they've got. And they helped us identify what are the jargon that the experts are using, and what questions have they got and how might we answer those. So on the basis of that workshop, they were armed with a crib sheet, and their task was to go off and interview a friend or family member, tell them a little bit about what they'd found out in the first workshop, and just have an interview. They had to record that interview and send the audio file to us so we could analyze it. We then brought the same participants back with the experts to explore, how did they find that interview? What questions did your participant have? Were you able to answer them? And has the experience of doing that interview changed your views at all about potentially using hydrogen in your home? So the two real striking findings were, first of all, the confidence in safety that people had. Yes, sure, a few people were, hydrogen, isn't that explosive? Is that going to be okay in our homes? But everybody, without fail, was confident that if hydrogen is running in our homes, it will have been tested, it will be safe. And of course, the added bonus is that there's no danger of carbon monoxide poisoning with hydrogen. So people actually found that a big bonus. The second striking finding was the level of support that people had after these workshops. Now remember, we are working with those three groups in the middle who are really not particularly interested, the majority of them, and they were really had mixed feelings. They weren't strongly in favour or strongly against. And by the time that they conducted their interview, then they were convinced, even though the aim of this was not about convincing them, it was about finding out the questions they had. They were strong advocates for having this transition to hydrogen. They could identify the benefits. They had no idea, actually, that every time they turn on their heating or use their gas hob for cooking, it's releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Once they knew that, they wanted something to be done about it and strongly supported hydrogen. Now, in terms of how do you explain it, people wanted to know, why is it happening? Where does hydrogen come from? Will it cost more? What about replacing our appliances? We have evidence that a blend of hydrogen up to 20% doesn't need a replacement for appliances, but 100% hydrogen will do. So what help will be available? Are any other countries converting? And what's the point if it's just the UK? Is it safe? And what are the practicalities? What's going to happen if this conversion goes ahead? What will I have to do? And then finally, when will it happen? So in summary, at the time of the survey, which was about 3 years ago, most people didn't know that natural gas is causing climate change. Most accept the need for change and do support 100% hydrogen transition. They're not concerned about safety apart from unintended consequences. So the big question they had is, what do we not know? What could potentially we will look back and regret in the future? There are concerns about the cost of replacing appliances, particularly for people who are more vulnerable in society. And there is a demand for information. Why is the conversion happening? And what's going to happen if it goes ahead? So the next research that we've been doing is to develop an interactive display that the public can use to find out more about this. That's developed, that's in operation. And we're about to launch another survey to find out, have these tiers or groups changed? And also to test an animation that we produce to explain what is hydrogen, how is it produced, and why is it better for the environment? We also want to understand, how does hydrogen affect the wider sustainable behaviour that people have? Does the prospect of using hydrogen have knock-on effects to make people more willing and more enabled to make further changes to their lifestyle? Another project we've got running at the moment is to monitor how hydrogen affects air quality. So we're doing that in a couple of homes, exhibition homes that are powered by 100% hydrogen. And we're also undertaking work to explore willingness to take part in hydrogen trials. Again, what questions do people have? Would they want this to happen in their backyard or more specifically in their homes? Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Fiona. And I think my interest in this is because it's probably one of the more remote renewable technology and energy sources that are likely to come on. Is understanding people's perceptions of it, I think, is really interesting, because certainly the more I read, we are likely to see this becoming mainstream at some point, but actually how we react to it now and how we believe we're going to use it, I think, is really useful. I think in terms of your the information you're getting back, and I know it's almost anecdotal, but how do you think the reactions of people to, let's say, hydrogen would compare to using renewable from photovoltaics? Do you think they're going to be similar? I'm almost, asking people to use one source to another.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and we found some answers right at the beginning when we had those initial interviews about how do you even talk to people about hydrogen. People are actually quite attached to using gas, particularly for cooking. So those people who currently use gas typically don't want to switch over to electric because they see they've got much more control and so on. Also, people have heard a few things about heat pumps and thinking it might be expensive to do that, or a few people, because attitudes have changed remarkably and awareness has changed remarkably since we started this research. People now are a lot more clued up, a lot more aware of the debates. And the last set of interviews I did, which is only a couple of months ago, people were showing much greater willingness to change, yes, to photovoltaics, but certainly a few concerns about, I have heard this, I have heard that it might not be suitable for every home, I have heard that my system might not be suitable, I have heard that my home might be not insulated enough. So I have seen a massive change over the last 3 years in terms of people's willingness to make changes to their lives in order to reduce their energy efficiency, but also their awareness of the options that are available to them and some of the questions they might need to ask to try and find the best solution for them, their family and their home.
No, I'd agree that I think certainly people who are actually coming to us and asking questions about technology sustainability has increased massively, and I think that's come off the back of lots of connected government action, COP, and also possibly some of the energy security and energy risers that are certainly putting pressure on everybody to change. One of the things that makes me think about why should we engage in these technologies, because even with hydrogen production, you've got to produce it somewhere. So somewhere there's going to be a plant and there's going to be development that somebody doesn't want in their backyard. Same with the photovoltaics, and the same with wind power. Is we want the clean energy, but we don't necessarily want to be sat next to the power plant. But I think it's really interesting when we've had the experience of COVID. I used to be able to see some homes, some mountains or hills across the valley that I can no longer see again now, just because there was cleaner air. And I think that certainly some of the discussions we had with sort of cleaner air, cleaner technology might resonate a bit more than they did in the past. Fiona, with regards to the and I might be asking, and I might be wrong to ask this in many ways, but in terms of the quality of air, are we expecting the quality of air to improve in homes with hydrogen, or in terms of less CO2 or the produced from natural gas that would have otherwise got in? Is that, and then I'm presuming there's more water from hydrogen, but I don't know.
This is a research that we've currently got underway, so I can't answer that question just yet, but you're right. What we're particularly interested in looking at is what happens to the humidity inside people's homes, because when hydrogen is burnt, it releases heat and a little bit of water. So what does that do to humidity? Because that is actually one of the questions that people had. And so therefore we're going to do some research so that we can answer that question confidently and accurately. So
Okay.
nice one.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I think we'll meet all this future development with even more interest. If there are any brief questions, I'm going to pick up a few in the thread, but please, I might have time for one or two if people want to raise their hand. And if there's anything that I've not picked up in the chat, please feel free to raise your hand, and I can open up the mic. I could see that in the chat earlier on there was a question. This would either be to Lucas or Robin, around the difficulty in obtaining batteries, and I'm sure this is affecting everyone, but what's your experience with actual access to batteries and presumably the materials for solar as well?
Yeah, so it's a big topic, so I'll just touch on it briefly. I mean, it has been a very challenging time to procure just about everything that we need to, but we've just had to change our business model. So before, when we bought things maybe a month before going out to build it, now we're doing 6 months or a year before we're starting that process. So it has been difficult, but we've been able to pivot quickly and make sure we can secure the components that we need to deliver the projects.
Thank you. And then there's a question that was raised earlier, and I think you did touch on it slightly, but it was talking about PVs and that work on daylight as opposed to direct sunshine, and I think that's probably in terms of the bifacials. But anything else you want to add to that?
Yes, so just to clarify, so the PV modules, they'll take direct sunlight or sunlight on a cloudy day equally well. It's just with the bifacial modules, the way in which the light reflects off the ground, you actually get more gain per unit on a cloudy day. So in places where it's not as sunny, you have a better energy yield.
And there was also a question about the sols, and I'm going to get the pronunciation of this wrong. So Provostgite, is that right? Is someone's asking what the cells are made of?
Yes, so that is one technology improvement, but the technology improvement that I was talking about on a future project is actually the way in which they process the underlying silicon that the modules are made up with has just been changed slightly, and so that allows the higher efficiency, the longer module life, and lower degradation.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Just a question for you, because I think we've touched on it a little bit, but since we've had the photovoltaics in there and we've got less human access, and then presumably the sheep are still grazing under, what are the ecological changes? What's the rewilding that you've seen? I mean, it's anecdotal rather than research, but what do you see coming back into the neighbourhood?
Yeah, okay, yeah, fine. We've found increase in partridges, pheasant increase. We've got wild buzzards now that are nesting in the area, and we've got barn owls back in the region for the first time. And I think Romy can vouch for that, because I think he's done a survey on that one. So yeah, we're finding quite a lot of uptake. And with the flood scheme at the bottom, which is part of Wakefield Defence Flood Scheme, obviously we've got a lot of Canada geese coming in now. We've got swans down there and that sort of thing. So there's a massive increase that we've found, and basically with it being it's a much quieter place, and with the regreening, we're finding a massive increase in all bird species, and we've got a very good cross section that's around to us now, and we're getting some bird scrapes over the other side, and we're looking at reintroduction of some more species that's over there. And I've got to say, I think on a day-to-day basis and just on a walking around the site and around the fields around the land, I think we've got a 40 or 50% increase to what we had, and we've got species that's never been there before.
Thank you. James, just a last comment for you in terms of Coca-Cola. Do you think it was a 2040 target? Are Coca-Cola really serious about that? Are they going to do that? How are they going to get rid of the waste?
Rid of the waste in terms of
just waste in general, and I suppose almost the other question is how people are starting to talk about scope 4 emissions, almost customer or which seems to be almost impossible to handle. But I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts on that. So you know, are you going to get to zero carbon by 2040? And then if the, you know, how do you deal with waste in that model?
I think the commitment's there. I think that we'll make it one way or another. I think the bit that I think people can often jump to is, are you just going to get carbon offsets and that's how you achieve it? And I think one of the things that we've been quite clear about is that we're going to look at our emissions and how we can reduce them before we look at any offsetting programs. So we definitely, you know, we set a target to reduce our carbon footprint by 2025. We achieved that in 2019, 2020. So we set a target before and we've reached that. And, you know, the commitment is there from the business at all right up to the top level. And I think, you know, it's not just necessarily, you know, it's what we need to do, but, you know, investors and you know, other you know, everyone's looking at carbon reduction and you know, even consumers, you know, it's getting to the point now where consumers are making their decisions based on the sustainability and that side of the brands that they're buying. So I think we'll do it. I don't think we'll have any choice to do it in the long run. I think at the minute it's going to be a long journey, and we're right at the beginning of that. And how we get there, I think it's still a question mark. You know, it's still 18 years away. So yes, I think we'll do it. I think the commitment's there. You know, you can go onto our website and see some of the work that's already been done and some of the commitments that have been made. So I think how we get there is still up for debate, but I think we will definitely get there by the time we get to 2040.
Yeah. Since cynically, I'm wondering whether Elon Musk is working out how to connect our communities to get us all to convert to his way of living. Andy, just picking up finally, you know, we've both done quite a bit of work with the Commission and Leeds City Council. You know, do you believe that they are advanced in terms of connecting together to achieve you know, go down that route of zero carbon?
You mean the Commission or the Council or both? Both,
really. It's a connected approach, really, isn't it? So it's almost like, how are we doing this, really?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is that there's just an unbelievable capacity gap in local government and in organisations like the Commission. So I think the Leeds City Council are doing the best that they can with the capacity that they have, really doing some really pioneering work around things like district heating and the work that they're doing on their own housing stock and that sort of thing. But I think that convening role is something that's hopefully going to come out of, because the Mayor of West Yorkshire's committed £40 million to the climate and environment plan, and I think that convening role and that bringing together different stakeholders, I think it's certainly what we're trying to do on this project, and there's overlaps with the stakeholders that we'll be bringing together around better homes, around the energy system, about mobility and transport, and I think that's what's missing. And I think hopefully what's going to come out of the net zero strategy is that there is a recognition, and I was involved in a report with PwC and UKRI looking at this, what needs to be that delivery framework. How is national government really going to work with local government, really going to work with local communities? They're putting their effort into the regional hubs. So we have a North Eastern Yorkshire regional hub, which its remit is to work with the combined authorities. But you've just got that massive gap, because that same PwC report that we're involved with really shows the massive social value that comes from local delivery. If you have local solar farms under local control working with local communities, and even better if they're owned by community energy, the multiplier effect and social value, but also the multiplier effect in terms of influence and leading to more positive action is just huge. And I think that's what we've got to pull together. People like Leeds City Council and West Yorkshire Combined Authority need help, and they need support, and they need to build that kind of network around exactly this sort of project that we've been talking about today in Leeds. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think I think today's event has been really useful for me, both seeing how we're doing things across the region and how we're actually connecting social networks, local networks, and responding to the challenge. I've been really impressed with the quality of activity that's undertaken in our region, as well as the presentations today. So we don't appear to have any more pressing questions. I'm going to thank every one of the presenters. Unless there's any final comments, is there any comments from any of the presenters? Steve, you look like you're itching to say something.
It's just, I think some practical things. I think with the hedgerow improvements and the tree planting and basically the woodland and the schemes, we think, and without you guys doing a proper calculation, I think we're achieving or taking around 3,000 tonnes of carbon a year. So it's catching carbon. So I mean, it is a good way of catching carbon. So these guys, where they're doing, it's all pieces of the jigsaw really. Robin with his piece, Andy with his piece and communities, Ian with his part, what's benefit his part of the community and social and local things. I think if we can actually get this carbon and capture it, and like Robin's looking to do, and we can actually take the carbon out of the thing, it's actually solutions for global warming, and it's small little things that will actually bring it all together. And we're all doing the same sort of thing, but in a different way. So hopefully it'll all pull together and hit the target.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think I do think if this scheme was replicated across the country, we wouldn't have a problem. But the reality is it's not. And certainly when I'm engaging with people on bigger groups who are trying to work out how they do this, is a problem. So where we've got examples in Yorkshire, it really does need to be praised. Really leaves with me with the task of saying thank you to everyone. So thank you, Stephen, John, Ian, Robin, Lucas, James, Andy and Fiona. Some brilliant presentations, and really look forward to, and John, look forward to seeing you all again and seeing how this work develops. But I know we're going to be taking things forward at the Leeds Sustainability Institute, and really looking forward to decarbonising and living a bit more greenly, and hopefully we can do that and restore some of the ecology and social communities as well. So thank you to everybody. Been some great presentations, and lovely to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.